So this is a little tutorial on how to get molecular Maya meshes and other sort of particle systems, if you were in that situation, to render as a unified mesh. If you have distinct particle meshes, and I'm just going to import a couple of PDBs here for demonstration. Okay, that's quite a large one, but let's see if we can find something else. You know what, I'm just going to work on this small one. So I'm going to, okay. So I've got this molecular Maya molecule here, and let's say I've got two copies of it that I wanted to have together, or maybe there were all these meshes that I wanted to sort of be all merged together. If I came down here and turn on Mesh Viz, I've got these two distinct meshes that are sort of overlapping, and that's not really what I want. If I wanted this all one mesh, it's really hard to actually create these particles, to create these separate, or a unified mesh, because they're separate particle systems. But there's a way around that. So what we can do is we can actually get these particles to emit their own set of particles. And the way we do that is to select the particles themselves. So we're going to have to come down here to select all of these particle systems. So we've got 4 of them selected. And then we can go down to nParticles, create nParticles, and I'm actually going to change it to points, I think. It shouldn't matter too much. We'll have to change some of the settings anyways. We're going to set emit from object, and we're going to call this molecule mesh, and we're going to create a new solver. The emitter type is omni, that's fine, and the rate particles per second, we just want 1 particle per original particle, so we're just going to turn that down. We're going to set the speed to 0. We're going to set pretty much everything to 0, and we're going to click create. And so now what it's doing is all of these emitters, all of these particles are going to be emitting particles, but it's in one single nParticle system. And so if we come down to, we want to set the collisions, we want to say collide off. We want collide and self-collide off because we don't want them bouncing off of anything. And dynamic properties, we want to ignore solver wind and ignore solver gravity. We want to go into wireframe mode so we can see these a little better. So let's just rewind and play and see what happens. Okay, so we've got a particle that's been created at the center of every other particle. And that's actually kind of useful. We can change the shading type to spheres, although it doesn't really matter that much. And we can increase the radius under particle size to sort of match the radius of the original atoms. Now, one limitation of this system is all of these particles are going to be exactly the same size, whereas with the original mesh, these actually had specific radii for different atom types: oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. So, but that's okay. We're just making an approximation anyways. So we can just create something that's kind of the average size. The other thing that we want to do is we want these particles to be constant. We don't want them to be disappearing and being re-emitted. So we can come down to nSolver, and we can set this to be the initial state. So basically what that does is it sets the particle position and the fact that it's there to be the state that even if you rewind, and I'm just going to hide the original I'm gonna, oops. I'm gonna hide the original molecular Maya molecules. So even though we're at the beginning of our timeline, these particles are still here. And at this point, then we can just disable the nucleus solver so that nothing else will happen. So even if we rewind and play, there's going to be no simulation. They're just static, and that's what we want. And then what might remember is that we can come down to modify, convert nParticle to polygons, and we have a single unified mesh that is all of these molecule parts together. Now it might look all weird and blocky, and that's because we need to change some of the attributes in the output mesh. So I'm going to decrease the threshold, increase the blobby radius scale, increase the mesh triangle size, give it some smooths. You know what, let's put this up to something a bit higher. Okay, so now we're starting to get something that looks a little bit more like a molecular Maya surface. And basically we can just duplicate the mesh and hide everything else that, you know, group it or delete it or hide it or, you know, do something to it so that we're just left with our regular mesh. And now we've got a single unified mesh that we can do whatever our animation requires us to do. Now, as I said before, we've got some problems with this mesh. There are holes in it, but that shouldn't be too hard to fix. If we go to object mode, edit or mesh, fill holes, that should fill the holes for us, at least most of them. And then the other thing we want to do is go to the normals, soften edge, and that will sort of soften out where those holes were. And I think that that looks relatively decent. We can hit 3 to sort of smooth it. And we have a pretty decent looking single mesh from the molecule. So that's one way to get around the limitation of the molecular, you know, the molecules being independent particle systems. There are a couple limitations with this. As I said, you only have one atomic radius. You also can run into problems where if you have a really, really huge molecule, that the mesh won't, sometimes it can't generate the whole mesh because it's just too many polygons, and so sometimes it doesn't work as well. And it can also be hard if you're trying to match this surface representation with some surface representation from molecular Maya. It can be a little bit hard to match exactly the sort of resolution and blobbiness and stuff. You kind of have to play with the parameters a bit, but that's the general idea.